He vanished on Black Hollow Trail, and now the forest whispers him back. An ASMR horror story from the darkest trailheads. You're listening to ASMR 404 Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I never thought a hiking trail would make me doubt the shape of the sky, they say. The Ozarks stretch like a worn ribbon across Arkansas, with trails so old they forget their own names. But this one wasn't forgotten. It was hidden, buried like a secret people hoped would never surface again. The sign was half-eaten by moss, black, hollow switchback. Trail etched in faded green slats that bowed inward like it was trying to fold itself shut. The wooden post was crooked as the earth itself wanted it to fall and vanish. My cousin Eli told me about it after his stint working wildfire recovery. He said locals refused to talk about that ridgeline. Said even the animals went quiet up their ride. Thought it was a joke, a ghost story to make the new ranger twitchy. I was wrong. We started the hike late afternoon, thinking we'd be back before dark. The incline was steep, and the trail was laced with thick roots that looked like veins pulsing from the mountain's heart. Everything smelled wet. Too wet, like the forest was sweating, like it knew what was coming. We didn't hear birds, not one, no chirps, no wing beats, not even the usual drone of bugs. Just wind threading itself through the branches like it was whispering, and waiting. I kept looking. Behind me, I couldn't help it even though Eli was ahead. I felt watched from behind, from something that didn't move when we moved, didn't breathe when we breathed. Something patient halfway. Up the switchbacks, the forest changed. The trees grew tighter together, and the bark looked split like blistered. Skin like they had grown in pain. Some were wrapped with old rusty wire fencing that had sunken deep into the wood like the trees had eaten it, trying to digest something that tried to trap them long ago. And then we found the campsite. It was not on any map, and it was not new. The fire pit was a ring of black stones, perfectly round but packed with ash. So deep it looked like no one had ever cleaned it. A bent kettle still sat beside it, turned to rust, and something inside clinked when Eli poked it with his boot, but he didn't open it. The log benches were still intact, though rain had soaked through the bark, and a wet mold smell clung to them stronger than anything natural above us. The canopy had closed thick like a ceiling, and I realized the light was wrong. It wasn't fading like sunset. It was draining as if color itself bled out of the leaves and into the ground. Eli said he wanted to push on, just to see where the trail ended. I agreed. Against my better sense, the switchbacks became narrower, the trees older, their trunks warped with bulging knots and hollows, like faces screaming, but caught mid-silent. Some had red sap leaking from splits that smelled like rotted fruit and iron, and that's when we heard it, a bell, not loud, not near, but deep, distant. Something old and slow and deliberate, like it was calling. Something not us, but something in the trees. I turned to Eli and asked if he heard it, and he nodded, but didn't stop walking. And something about his silence scared me more than the sound. We reached a clearing that wasn't on the topo map, and I swear to you, there were stones lined in a spiral knot. Random, not natural, hand-placed and weathered black, with what looked like burn marks in the shape of hands, and at the center was a hole knot, a natural depression, not a sinkhole. This was carved with purpose, 5 feet wide, and ringed with bones. Not animal bones, not human either, but something in between. He leaned over and said he heard breathing coming up from it, and I told him to back off, and he laughed. But it wasn't his laugh. It was too slow to open. Sun had gone without setting, like someone flipped a switch, and the woods turned gray. And still I told him we had to leave now, and he nodded, but he didn't move. He just stared into that hole and whispered something. I couldn't hear, something wet and rhythmic, like a chant, and then he jumped eerie. Didn't see him hit bottom, just the sound like a stone splashing into thick syrup, and then silence again, except for the bell closer. Now Ronnie didn't look back, because I could hear something climbing out of that pit, and the sound wasn't footsteps. It was dragging, scraping, like bone on bark. The switchbacks had changed. They twisted wrong, now turned to sharp, led me back to places I'd already passed, but from the wrong angle. I saw the same tree 3 times, the one with the branch, like a broken finger, and each time it looked more like it was pointing. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out and I fell, and when I looked up, there were eyes, not glowing, not bright, just reflecting from somewhere deep and too high and too many and too still. The bell sounded again, this time behind me and ahead and above, like it was everywhere. And I started crying without realizing. E.T. don't know how I got out. I woke up in a ranger station, 2 counties south, dehydrated and raving. They said I'd been missing 3 days. They found me curled under a bridge with moss packed in my ears and bark stuffed in my mouth. Lie was never found. Not a trace. They closed the trail again, but I hear the bell sometimes in my dreams, and when I wake up I find dirt under my nails and pine needles in my bed. I remember the shape of the sky was wrong, like it bent inward over black hollow and never bent back. I tried not to go back. I swore I wouldn't, but something in me knew I had to. Started slow. After I got out, the dreams became clearer, not just sound and dirt and dark, but faces, or maybe just masks carved from bark, moving without mouths, but still speaking. They never said Eli's name, but they always made me look down, and every time I looked, there were roots wrapped around my ankles, like they were waiting for the command to pull. My therapist said it was trauma. The rangers said it was shock. But neither of them explained how my boots were caked in clay from a place I'd never been, or how my fingernails sometimes came back black and cracked, even though I stayed inside for days. Told myself it was guilt that I had left Eli, and my brain just wanted to punish me over and over, till the photo arrived. No return. Address just a manila envelope slid under my apartment door, and when I opened it, I dropped it right there on the floor. It was a photo printed on old glossy paper, stained at the edges with water rings and streaks of what looked like dried sapin. The photo, Eli was standing in the center of that spiral of stones, but now the hole was gone, and the stones were bleeding, not metaphorically, not like moss or dye. They were actively dripping a thick red fluid, and Eli was smiling, but his smile was too wide, and his eyes too dark, and behind him the trees had changed. Shape bent inward over him, almost like they were shielding him from view or hiding what stood behind man. In the bottom corner of the photo, scratched, not printed, was the word returnee. Packed my bag that nighty, didn't call anyone. I didn't write a note. I just drove back roads, only no music, windows down, like I needed the wind to hear me. The forest didn't greet me like before. It was worse, it was awake. Everything was too still again, but this time I heard things between the silence, little cracks in the stillness, like wet twigs breaking under something. Too heavy to be dear. The sign was gonna. Black hollow switchback trail. Not even the moss-eaten post. Just raw dirt where it had been torn out, like someone didn't want anyone to know it had ever been there. But I remembered Dan. The ground remembered May, stepped off the main trail into the tree line, and the smell hit me like a wave, wet bark, thick rot, and something like copper and old meat and rain, all melted into the air like a breath. Too close to your ears. The deeper I went, the more the forest twisted itself back into place, like it had waited for me, like it had rehearsed its shape, just to show me what it remembered. The fire pit was still there, but the kettle was gone, and the ash was fresh. Someone had lit a fire recently, or something had. That log benches were turned over now. Claw marks dug deep into their bark, and one of them had been dragged toward the spiralda. Stones were cleaner now, like they'd been scrubbed or polished, and they didn't bleed anymore, but they pulsed like something underneath them was breathing. Slow and heavy. I didn't speak, not even to myself. I didn't call Eli's name because I knew he wasn't going to answer with the same voice. I walked to the center and stood where he had stood. Nothing happened at first. Just the sound of wind curling around the clearing like a voice waiting to form words, and then the ground shifted, not like an earthquake, not a tremor, but like something beneath me exhaled. Then I heard the bell again, but it wasn't distant. This time it was close, right behind my left ear, and it rang not with metal but with something softer, like bone. Striking bone, striking bone. I turned to fast and saw something step back behind a tree. And I say something because it looked human, but it was too tall and too thin, and its skin reflected no light, and its joints bent slightly wrong as it moved. Die ran again. But the forest didn't let me this time. Every tree was closer than before. The trail bent in ways I didn't recognize, and no matter which direction I turned, I came back to the spiral. But each time it looked different. One time it was filled with water, and something swam in circles below the surface. Another time the stones had faces carved into them, open-mouthed and screaming. Once I saw Eli again, but he had no mouth at all. And still, I heard him whispering in my head. I started screaming, not words, just sound, trying to make the forest reject me. And then I saw Itha, old ranger, tower knot. In any modern maps, no trail markers led to it, but there it was, tilted and half consumed by ivy, like the forest was digesting it, one beam at a time. I climbed because I had nowhere else to go. The ladder was rusted and wet, and one rung broke and cut my palm, but I didn't stop at the top. Everything looked wrong. The canopy below wasn't green anymore. It was gray and moving, like it wasn't leaves, but backs of things, crawling over each other, shifting positions, waiting for me to come down. Inside the tower was worse. There were drawings carved into the walls, not with tools, but with fingers deep, ragged gouges of spirals and eyes and open mouths, and a shape I didn't recognize it. In the corner, a recorder sat still, red light, blinking like it had just turned offy. Pressed planned. I heard myself crying, begging, whispering things I didn't remember saying, in a voice that wasn't mine anymore, saying things like bring him back, saying things like let me see, saying things like take me instead. The last sound on the tape was a bellend, then a laugh, slow, wet, broken like lungs, filled with barkand. Then Static Eye left the tower, but the forest didn't look the same though. Trail was gone completely, and in its place was a narrow path of bones, pressed flat into the soil like thousands of creatures had died walking in single file. To that same whole land I followed, it because I didn't know how not to end, because I knew where it would end. I followed that path because something had taken my voice and replaced it with instinct, and that instinct said walk forward no matter how loud your bones. Scream no matter how many shapes you see twitching just beyond the edges of your sight. Trees didn't just lean now, they moved with me, pulsing like veins, crowding in so the trail narrowed every step until I had to push through bark that felt warm against my arms like skin, and then the bell rang again, but this time it wasn't behind, or ahead, or above. It was inside my ears, like my own bones were vibrating to match it there. Hole appeared not as a pit anymore, but as a mouth in the earth, wide and dark and waiting its edges, slick with something living, something that breathed. Were handprints around it, dozens, maybe hundreds, some human, some stretched too long or twisted like they'd melted into the soil, and one of them, I recognize Elizabeth. I'd seen that crooked knuckle from when he broke his finger in 8th grade. I saw it again, pressed into the edge like he'd been pulled. In mid-grobby, dropped to my knees. Something inside me expected to see his face rising up out of the dark, like some twisted version of baptism. But what came up instead was the rot, not decay, but memory, the smell of our grandfather's old basement, where we hid from storms, the scent of pine from the soap we both used that summer we worked trails in Colorado, the blood from the time he fell onto shale, and we had to wrap his leg with his own shirt hand. Underneath it all, something foul, something pretending to be memory, so I'd lean closer, and I leaned until my breath stirred the dark, and it stirred back, and I swear to you, it whispered with my voice, not like an echo, like it had taken my words and learned how to use them. It said things I hadn't spoken out loud since I was a child, fears I never told anyone's secrets. No one knew, and each word felt like fingers crawling up my spine, pressing into the back. My scully wanted to scream, but the air was thick and wrong. It clung to my throat like cobweb and oil, and I felt myself falling forward. But something caught me, not with hands, with roots thin, cold, wrapping fast around my arms, my neck pulling backward, like the earth didn't want me to leave, like the forest itself wanted me to stay and learn the chantand. I saw them, the watchers, dozens of them standing between the trees, tall and thin, their faces masked in bark, their mouths stitched or missing. their eyes reflective like wet stones, and they didn't move, they just stared and tilted their heads in unison, like they were listening to something. I couldn't hear, but I could feel Ita's pulse rising from the ground, a rhythm not of life, but of hunger on. Then Eli stepped from the hole. He looked the same but wrong, like someone had made a model of him from memory, but missed details. His skin was pale and stretched too tight, his smile, slow like melting wax. And when he spoke, it wasn't with breath. He said my name, but the sound bent around it like the trees didn't want me to hear it. Clearly, he reached for me, and I stepped back, and the watchers stepped forward, not to stop me, but to push me closer, like I was part of the ritual now, like I'd been marked the moment I saw that Fotoeli said come with me, and his mouth didn't move, and his hand stayed outstretched, and I saw his fingers twitch like they were trying to remember how to be fingers again. Then I saw it behind me. The whole something moved not. A creature, not a person. Something bigger, something wearing the whole like a cloak. Its body made of faces and branches and memory and sound. And it looked at me without eyes, and I understood this place wasn't haunted, was hungry, and memory was its meat it fed on the minds of those who wandered too far, on the thoughts you never spoke, the truths you buried deep, and it shaped itself into those truths, into those lies, until you couldn't remember who you were without. Put hand. I knew I had to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The watchers were singing now, low, deep, a hum, in a language without words. Just sorrow and invitation, and the forest bowed in around them like a church built from root sand. I was the sermoner bit, my tongue hard enough to taste blood, and the taste was enough to jolt me free, enough to move one foot, enough to stumble, backward away from Eli's knot and hissed without sound, and the watchers raised their arms, and the sky cracked like paper, and the bell rang again, louder than ever, like the forest itself was splitting. I ran blind through trees that grabbed, through air that screamed. I ran until the forest thinned and the darkness peeled back. I don't remember collapsing, I don't remember the ranger finding me. They say I was dehydrated, agented in pine needles and bite. Marks no one believes me. The trail isn't on maps. The spiral isn't there anymore. But the watchers are, because I see them now, even outside the woods in the corner, rooms reflected in glass, and sometimes I hear the bell ringing from the drain in my bathroom or from inside my phone. Isn't gun here's part of it, and maybe I am too now, because sometimes when I sleep I see myself in the spiral, but from above. I'm not wearing my skin, and the trees are bent inward again, waiting for something, waiting for you. They told us the trail was closed after the landslide, but there was no tape, no gate, just a rusted sign half buried in shale that read, Sandcliff Ridge Trail. Use at own risk. We weren't stupid, we were just bored. It was me, Carter, and Lena. 2 years out of college, staying near Lake Chelan for the summer. We'd hiked the forest plenty, but never passed the ridgeline. The locals said no one crossed that shale since the collapse. We laughed at it. The trail looked normal, wide enough for a truck, packed with pine needles and shaded by dense Douglas firs that whispered even when there was no wind. But the air felt thin, like something large had inhaled and never exhaled Carter, led the way with his dumb GoPro strapped to his head, muttering commentary for his non-existent YouTube channel, and Lena walked behind him, eyes scanning the trees like she didn't want to admit how nervous she was. I was in the back. Always take the rear when we hike. I like watching where we've been. It started. Normal bird sounds, pine scent, light wind through the ridgeline, and then the noise stopped, not slowly, not naturally, just gone, like something had covered my ears. Carter turned and asked if we heard that, and I said, "What?" And he said, "Exactly." And we all laughed, but it felt wrong. We came to the shale slide faster than expected, a long slope of broken stone cracking beneath our feet like hollow bones. It cut through the trail like a scar the forest didn't want to heal on. The other side was a wooden sign tilted at an unnatural angle. Burned into it with deep black letters were the words, "No bells beyond this Pelion-tea." We thought it was a joke, some kind of prank sign, until Lena pointed out the hooks. Dozens of rusted iron hooks dangled from the trees around the trail, some still holding bits of frayed rope and a few with shattered pieces of metal like cracked bells. Carter wanted to record it. Lena wanted to turn back. I said, "We go just to see where it led." We cross. The air changed the moment my boot touched the other side, heavier, colder. The trees taller with bark so dark it looked scorched, and the smell, it wasn't rot, not quite, more like mildew, mixed with rust, like water that sat too long in something dead. The trail narrowed, and the ground turned soft. Our boots sank with each step into soil that looked gray even under daylight, and then we heard Itabel far off, low and slow, like it was rung underwater. It echoed wrong, bouncing from tree to tree, not fading, just repeating, until it sounded like dozens of bells, all ringing slightly out of sync. Tor spun around, recording like an idiot, and Lena grabbed my arm and whispered, "Do not answer." It didn't ask why. We pushed deeper, and the trail turned sharper, carving down into a hollow we didn't know existed. The trees thinned, and what looked like old wooden posts stuck out from the soil. Markers, grave markers maybe, or fence posts. They were smooth and darkened with age, but each one had a piece of fabric nailed into it. Strips of red cloth like prayer flags, but torn, soaked, and brittle. One post had a name scratched in Bearwainen. Wadley, do not open. That's when Carter found the door. Not a house door, not a trapdoor. Ray, wooden plank set into the hillside, carved with symbols I didn't recognize, lines that bent too many times, and circles that weren't circles, like someone drew them while being watched. There was a smell coming from behind it, sweet-rotten, like syrup left to sour. Carter wanted to open it. Lena said she would leave if he. Dee told him we were wasting daylight and needed to move on. He listened for once, but the bell rang again, closer this time, and something replied. Not a word, not a scream, just a groan, deep and long, like the ground itself was mourning. We moved fast down the trail, no one talking, no one daring to look back. The trees shifted around us, no longer random, but angled, pointed in toward the trail like ribs, closing around a spine. And then we saw them figure, still, taltal covered in dirt, like they'd risen halfway and forgotten why they started there. Heads were tilted and mouths open wide as if caught mid-prayer, and their arms hung limp with rusted bells tied around their wrists. Some were missing jaws, some eyes, but all of them faced the same direction toward the trail's endway. Something enormous stood shrouded in black cloth, hanging from the trees like a body too big for the forest. It rang a bell slowly, carefully, and the sound made my bones ache. Didn't look up, but it didn't have toe, knew it. Saw us, it rang once more, and the pale figures stepped forward. We should have run the moment we saw them, but the trail behind us was gone, erased like it had never existed. Just raw gray soil and crooked trees that pulsed like lungs holding breath. The pale figures walked slowly, dragging their feet as if they were new to the idea of motion. Their bells clinking softly, not in rhythm, not in music, but in warning. Grabbed Lena's hand, and Carter backed away, mumbling something about going wide through the trees, and when he turned, they stopped moving. Of them, every head turned at once, with that same sickening crack of dry bark, and stared at him. Their mouths opened wider, and something fell out to thousands of teeth falling into the leaves. But they weren't human, too long, too sharp, too many. Carter screamed. Band ran straight into the forest, and the bell rang again. The trees moved. They didn't shake, they didn't sway, they leaned. Door of them bending toward his direction, like they were listening or helping or hunting. We didn't follow, we couldn't guess. The figures turned toward us. Instead, Lena whispered, "Keep moving, keep your eyes down, don't ring anything." And I did what she said. We walked past the pale ones, slow, step by step, and they didn't touch us, but they watched, and their bells shook just enough to let us know they were real. We followed what remained of the trail deeper into the ridge, and the ground grew steeper, pulling us downhill into a gulch lined with standing stones, each one carved with the same twisting symbols as the door we saw earlier. They burned into your sight when you looked too long, and at the center of the stones a bounce, and blackened like it had been struck by lightning and never cooled. It stood suspended from a wooden arch, cracked and slick with Saplina said, "This is the center." The grave. The Kajai asked how she knew, and she just shook her head like the answer didn't come from her mouth. And I heard something else from the Bella whisper, not from the air, from inside. Day voice I hadn't heard in years. My brother died in this forest 10 years ago, vanished without a trace. They blamed whether they blamed his meds. They said he wandered off, but his voice came from inside the balasking for help, begging to be let out. I stepped forward, but Lena grabbed my arm, and her eyes were wide and wet and afraid. She said, "If you answer, they mark youth. You ring, they take youth." Figures stood on the hill above, now dozens, maybe more, silhouettes barely formed in the fog, bells on their arms, mouths agape, and empty eyes blinking without lids, watching, always watching. And I said something I regret. I said, "I need to hear it again." And the bell rang without moving, and the whisper returned this time. Not my brother, my mother, then my father, all dead, all lost, all asking Dant, "You want to see Dant, you want to remember." And I dearly wanted it more than breath, but Lena screamed and broke something. She tore one of the red cloths from a standing stone, and the sound that came next wasn't human. The bell let out a cry like metal weeping, and the earth cracked, and something beneath it stirred. The pale ones began to shake their bodies, convulsed, and the trees opened like ribs, peeling back round the hill behind the bell, revealing a shape too big to be a Pasantu, still to be alive, in a cloth of bells that didn't ring it, stepped forward, and the soil died where it walked, and the figures began to follow it in a line, slow and reverent, like a funeral that never ends. And we ran not through the forest, not through the trees, but down into a hollow where no roots grew, where the air forgot how to breathe, where the whispers couldn't reach. And behind us the bells grew quiet, not because we were safe, because they were listening again. The hollow wasn't safety, it was silence. Silence so thick you could feel it in your chest, pushing down like a second set of ribs, growing over your lungs. We crouched there beneath a crumbling ledge, where water once carved its way through black rock, and the walls pulsed like skin beneath the earth. Lena held her mouth shut with her hands, not because she needed to be quiet, but because something was trying to speak. Through Harry saw her eyes roll back, just for a moment, and when she blinked again, she whispered, "It's not over, they haven't eaten yet." He didn't understand then, but the ground above us shook, and the bell groaned again. Not rung, but alive, like a throat clearing itself before a scream. And I remembered something else, the stories my brother used to whisper them before he disappeared. Stories about the ridge, about the ones who lived beneath it, who came only for those who heard the bell in their dreams. He used to say, "There's no such thing as death here, only ringing." Guy thought he was just being creepy, but now I heard him again, not from the bell this time, but from the stone itself, echoing in the hollow. I stood up, and that was the mistake. The moment I moved, the silence shattered like glass, and a scream split the rocks above us. A voice layered in 1,000 others, all screaming the same word. "Come!" Lena grabbed my wrist, and we ran again. Not back up, not into the trail, but sideways, deeper into a passage that shouldn't have existed, which is a tunnel, but not dogma. Walls were smooth and black like volcanic glass, and they shimmered with trapped movement, like things were behind them, frozen or sleeping, or watching hand. The further we ran, the more bells we saw hung from twisted hooks in the ceiling, buried in the floor, tied to what looked like bones. Everyone silent, everyone waiting. Lena said, "The only way out is to go deeper. Let them see. You let them decide." I wanted to ask who she meant, but I didn't, because I knew the ones who watch, the ones who eat the sounder. Bellitus, they don't chase you. They wait for you to ring the wrong memory. Reached a chamber, and the floor fell away into darkness, and suspended above Eta, platform, made of bone and brass, and on it another. Bells Moller, perfect and touched. Lena said, "This is where it ends or begins on." She stepped onto the platform without mesh, said her name out loud, and the bell rang by itself, once, then twice, and her body broke not, blood not, fleshy, shattered like sound in a vacuum, and the dust of her curled upward, pit into the mouth of the bell and vanish, screamed again, this time inside. My head-eye dropped to my knees, and they appeared all around me, pale figures, bell, arms, teeth, falling in spirals, and at their center, the bellator itself, no face only, a mask of rusted iron carved into a smile, and a voice inside me said, choose. What memory do you want to lose forever, and what sound do you offer in return? I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think, but I whispered my brother's name. The bell took it. I felt it go, not the person, but the sound of his laugh gone. Your wrist. I couldn't remember it anymore, and they let me leave back through the tunnel, back through the trees that didn't move this time, back to a trailhead where the sign no longer said closed. It was gone, only splinters remained, and no one believes me, 'cause I don't remember why. I went there, only that something inside me never stops ringing. Now when I try to sleep, when I'm alone, I hear bells that don't sound like metal anymore. They sound like her voice, asking if I'll come back, if I'll remember, if I'll ring the bell just one more time.